Hello, everybody, and thank you for being here. We are so excited about today's event, and as we are for all of the events in our series, My Story, we really wanted to focus on real people with real stories, and that's what we're doing. Our last one was I Came Home from War. It featured veterans who are recently returned from combat, and it told of their experience in returning back to Lincoln, Nebraska, and what the challenges and successes they had in doing that. And it was inspiring. If you haven't had a chance to see it, it is online, and it's being run right now, I think, on Channel 10. And so take a chance to see that, too. You'll hear some very compelling stories of some of the heroes in our community. We also have two more events that are coming up in our series, and you can find out about those on the handout that's on your chair. One of them is I graduated from drug court. You're going to hear the real stories of people who have used that alternative to jail for their felony charge, and how they were able to successfully transition back into the community, and to really use that program as a way to change their lives. And so join us for that, as well as for I am a cancer survivor. And while all of us have been impacted certainly by even in our own lives or by people we know with cancer, it's going to be interesting to hear very unique stories. A person of color and their journey with cancer, as well as a person who was diagnosed at a very young age. And that will be done with the Malone Center here in Lincoln. And Larry Williams, the director of the Malone Center, is standing in the back. And so we're looking forward to that event. But now on to today. And speaking of heroes, we're going to be talking today about brain injury and surviving brain injury. And we're really excited to have this panel together. We're all extremely fortunate to be sitting here and listening to these stories. I want to have a chance and a privilege to introduce these folks to you. Micah Fulmer. Micah's right there. I think Micah, I heard, is a newlywed. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. The last, when we had our veterans event, we had one of the veterans who was on the panel's wife was expecting a baby that day. And she sat in the front row. We all kept a close eye on her all day, but we had a new parents that day. Today we have a newlywed. Micah is a graduate student working on his MBA at UNL, and you're going to hear his story of recovery after he was struck by a vehicle going 55 miles an hour while he was assisting a tow truck driver. And his willingness to share that story with passion and with a positive attitude is going to inspire you today. So we're excited to hear that. We're going to hear from Brandon Verzal, and Brandon and his wife Tiffany, you may know, you certainly have probably heard the story of Alexis, who was a victim of abusive head trauma, more commonly known as the shaken baby syndrome, when she was 14 months old. And so we're going to be hearing the story of their journey. They are filmmakers who have released a documentary called Forever Shaken, and I think you'll probably hear a little bit about that today. And so he's going to talk to you today about the devastating effects of abusive head trauma and how their tireless advocacy has inspired folks toward recovery. So we're very pleased you're here today too, Brandon. We are going to hear from Gina Simanek, who I've known for a couple of years and who I know, and many of you probably know, as an absolute tireless and passionate advocate for people with brain injury. Her story stems from personal experiences as well, but really she's here to talk about the demand for brain injury services because of the hours that she spends working as an ombudsperson for the needs of people with brain injury. And so she has that unique perspective that she'll share with you. But I also have the privilege of turning this over to Peggy Reisher, who is the Executive Director of the Brain Injury Association of Nebraska, who is our partner for today's event. And if I recall reading the information correctly, BIA, as it is known, is the only statewide organization that works exclusively with raising awareness about brain injury. So we're talking about thousands of people in our local community and across the tens of thousands of people in our local community and across the state who are impacted by brain injury. And we're going to learn a lot today and be inspired in the process. So thank you all for being here.
Well, thank you. Well, we appreciate the opportunity to be here, and
and feel honored to be one of the four topics selected to have the community conversation. So thank you. As she had shared with you, I'm the Executive Director for the Brain Injury Association. I've been in this position for just a little over a year, but my history is I've worked with individuals with brain injury for the last 20 years. I'd spent 14 years as a social worker at Madonna Rehab Hospital on the brain injury unit. So some of you I might look familiar, and I know some of you look familiar through my experiences there. Really, for the most part, you're going to hear these guys tell their stories. What I wanted to do was just hit, in my social worker ways, the boring parts, the numbers. In 2010, we did a needs and resource survey here in Nebraska, and it was identified as 36,000 Nebraskans are living in Nebraska with a brain injury, with a disability because of brain injury. Those numbers are large, and I don't think until we really started doing our best to count, we had any idea that there would be that many. Although a few years ago, we also passed legislation to send out a letter to individuals who have been coded or diagnosed as having a brain injury. And those numbers, when we send out those letters, we do that in cooperation with Health and Human Services and the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation. But just this last year, we sent over 10,700 letters to Nebraskans who had been identified or coded as having a brain injury. So we know those numbers are large. And with that registry information, we send them the Brain Injury Association's phone number, and that's when Gina starts getting the calls. She responds to a lot of those calls and questions, and people are really just asking for information and resources. And Gina will touch upon that a little bit today. Just briefly, you might wonder, what the heck does the Brain Injury Association do? We are a staff of 2. It's myself and Cindy Everett Christ. So Cindy, if you want to raise your hand. We work from our homes, and we're here in Lincoln. But for the most part, we're trying to create and build awareness about brain injury, and we do that through a lot of trainings. We do that through legislation. Our hope is that eventually, with the trainings that we have, we're also going to be able to build capacity in services. I think a lot of folks are being served in the community without being served by providers that don't necessarily understand what brain injury is. So through training and education, we're hoping to make that, improve the services in Nebraska. Our main areas of focus right now have been concussion, because it's in the news. So it becomes a low, we don't have to spend as much money promoting it because it's already being talked about. But we have a concussion awareness campaign called When in Doubt, Sit 'Em Out. And you'll be hopefully seeing more signs up here in Lincoln and also in Omaha area, where, again, getting the message out. The other area of focus is working with veterans with brain injury, doing a lot of training and helping educate the community about brain injury as well as PTSD, because those two things, there's a lot of symptoms that overlap. To date, we've had over 1,200 people attend those trainings, and a lot of those are service providers, so they're learning more about brain injury. And we do have a women's retreat coming up. There's a flyer out on the front desk. If you know of anybody who's a lady that supports a veteran, the individual doesn't have to have brain injury, but would like to participate in our women's retreat. It's going to be October 3rd through the 5th in Omaha. More information's out on a flyer. Our other area of focus is shaken baby or abusive head trauma, and Brandon will be certainly talking about that. That too there's a video, Forever Shaken. I brought a few of those DVDs. They're out on the counter, but if you'd like to watch that, we've also have that available on our website. So if you just Google Brain Injury Nebraska, you'll find us. And last but not least, we also do workshops and also brain injury conferences. And our brain injury conference is annually held in Kearney, and we'll have that coming up again in April of 2015, April 16th and 17th. And if you're, again, more information about that will be coming up on our website. with that, I'm going to turn it over to these guys because they've got the stories that you really came to hear today. But certainly if you have further questions or want to know more about the Brain Injury Association, please just stop and let me know. We are a nonprofit, so we're always looking for partners and opportunities to find funding. So let me know if you have any ideas for me. With that, what we were really hoping to do today is, like I said, share their stories. I think we'll start with that, having each of them tell you a little bit about themselves, and then we're going to transition into talking about what's it been like here in the Lincoln community and how have they felt supported. So with that, we'll turn it over. Gina, we'll have you start.
Hi, I'm Gina, and thank you so much, everyone, for coming here. This is exciting for all of us, especially just to have people who are interested and invested, just like we are, with the brain injury individuals as well as families. I was told to talk louder, so I will. Usually I talk too loud, so I really have to monitor myself here. Anyway, and thank you again to the Marshall and Lori and Jody for having us here and presenting this, because this is quite an honor. I have been, basically, my story begins when I was assaulted, and it was quite a while ago, over 20 years ago, and I incurred a brain injury. And, again, I hear and see so many people who have no idea what a brain injury is. I didn't either, until, of course, you're affected by it. And that's why I'd like to get as much education and resource information out to anybody who wants to listen and hear about it, because those of us who are affected, it impacts everyone on a day-to-day basis and in every way, physically, emotionally, socially, cognitively. Another thing, I've been impacted by brain injury by, after I was assaulted, my life really changed and turned around, and I got to talking with other brain injury survivors about their needs and what they're going through, and I found out really quick that a lot of those needs weren't being met. I felt like, some kind of Wonder Woman or someone, I kind of put myself into the position where I thought, I wonder if I could find someone to help this person, even though half the time I didn't even know what those resources were. But over time, as I got to talking to more professionals and more families and people with brain injuries, you find those resources. I started jotting those down. I started out with a little itty-bitty piece of paper, and now it's up to 20 pages long for resources, which is good. But there again, I'm not doing this work alone. There's so many of us, such as, who's at the table, and a lot of you who are in the audience who have made and allowed resources to become more available for people. And we all work together. It's just so interesting, the people that I see and meet every day. Every day, whether I know a person or don't know a person, I talk about brain injury. Because there again, as Peggy was mentioning, there are so many people with brain injury. And there's still a lot of people who don't realize or understand that they've had a brain injury or something that resulted from a concussion years ago, or a fall, or even a heart attack, something like that, where they lose oxygen to the brain. So basically, there's a lot of people out there. Another way that I've been affected by brain injury is I recently had a family member, my uncle, who incurred a brain injury this past October. So it was kind of interesting to be on the other side, being a family member instead of the individual with the brain injury, because I saw what his family went through also and try to help them along. I saw a lot more needs that needed to be attended to. So it was a big learning experience, and I became the Ombudsperson for the Brain Injury Association last June. And that was serving in a professional role made me very happy, because I'm also a mental health counselor, so they kind of go hand in hand together. Because people with brain injuries, often the secondary symptoms affect a lot of the emotional stuff. There's a lot of brain injury, anxiety, and depression go hand in hand together, as most of us know. And a lot of the psychiatric symptoms can incur also if the family member or individual does not have a lot of the support mechanisms around them. I guess I'll leave it to Micah from here.
Okay. I want to thank you all. I'm going to share a story. Sorry. This is the second time I've done this presentation. First time was to my graduate class, so it was a little easier for me, but I'm going to share a story about an event that happened and made a huge impact on my life on May 3rd, 2008. I'm a very outgoing and hardworking person. I've received my bachelor's degree from the University of Nebraska in 2001, and I just had gotten accepted to go back into graduate school at the time of the accident. The accident was on May 3rd, 2008. And in the following, I'm going to share with you about the accident and the 2,299 days, or 6 years from today. Friday, May 2nd, started out as a great day and night with friends. We were out, had dinner, and went out for the night, but it started to rain on late Friday, which made the roads a little bit bad, and I lived just outside of the city limits on Southwest 47th and West A Street. Our car actually got into the ditch, and we called for a tow truck driver who came and started hooking the car up, but the tow truck driver did not use his warning lights, and we were out in the street to make sure the car didn't get affected by the belt or anything from the tow truck driver. And a lady was coming west on A Street, did not slow down to see that there were people in the street, and struck me in the back of my legs at 55 at 55 miles an hour. Basically got hit in the back of my legs. My right shoulder hit the windshield, and my head then hit the roof, and I flew 100 feet in the air and then back to the ground. Luckily, my two best friends were with me. One was a doctor, the other was a firefighter paramedic. They were able to help me and get me laid out correctly for the time for Southwest Volunteer Fire Department to come out and pick me up. My injuries were very, very serious on the scene. What happened was they laid me out right for the volunteer fire department to pick me up and rush me to Bryan LGH. I had multiple fractures in my skull, and it was actually open, and my torn carotid artery made me choke on my own blood. This was very critical because I had to be brought back to life on the way back to Bryan LGH. My injuries included an epidural and subepidural hematoma, torn carotid artery, broken humerus, and both of my shoulders and legs were very, very bad condition. The primary focus at the time when I got to Bryan LGH were my head and its injuries. My first 20 surgeries were focused on my brain, head, and neck. The next 19 surgeries were on my shoulders and legs. In total, I went 39 surgeries in the first 3 weeks I was in ICU. If it were not for my friends, the EMT of Southwest Volunteer Fire Department, my doctors, and God, I would not be here to share this story with you. I was in ICU for 2 months, and I coded 5 times in the first week. I began to awake and to respond people after I was in the ICU for 9 days. But when I awoke, I had no idea who I was, who my friends and family were. It was each day that I would wake up and have to remember who I was, who my friends and family were, and what happened to me. I was in ICU for 2 months, and I coded 5 times in my first week. After I began to awake, then every day was new for me. When I'd wake up, I did not have any idea what happened to me. I knew I was in an accident because I could see my legs, but I still knew nothing about my injuries to my head. After 2 months in ICU, I was moved to Madonna Rehabilitation Hospital while I was waiting to be transported to Quality Living Incorporated out of Omaha, Nebraska. Madonna did a very good job with me, but I didn't understand the day I would be taught something, I would have to be retaught the next day because I would not remember the process and how it went. In August, I was moved to QLI. That's when I started to realize that the accident was more than just my legs. It was also my brain and my skills on how to live correctly. Basically, I spent 11 months at QLI, and I began to realize about my injuries and what my goals and everything were. Once I left QLI, I had to go back into Bryan LGH for my last major surgery on my right leg, which put me back in the hospital for 3 more months. I had a large external fixator placed on my tibia on my right leg, which helped me actually bone grow up and heal up correctly. With all of my surgeries and healing almost finished, I was able to begin to drive my car again, and I went back to the university and started working on my graduate degree. I also found the love of my life, and I got married on February 22nd, which was of this year, which was a great inspiration. I have made it through a major accident with very serious injuries, and I'm here to tell you about it 6 years later. There's still little things that I don't comprehend and always remember, and there's simple things I did before the accident, like riding a bike or doing things out in the public that could cause injury to me. A great example of this was last month I bought a new bike because I hadn't ridden my old bike for 6 years, and I thought it would be neat to have a new bike and get on the bike paths and ride on campus. My ortho doctor was very happy to see I was energetic, wanting to do something, but was kind of standoff in a bit, saying, you could ride a bike, but it might not be the best thing that you should do. Because if I ever receive any more injuries to either of my legs, the possibility of me being able to keep them is very, very minimal. With that in mind, I always try to think of great inspirations every day when I wake up about the activities that I do and the experiences that I face every day. And I've always remember 2 very inspiring quotes and the meaning of hope from my graduate class at the University of Nebraska, and 1 quote that I wrote in conjunction with those that I would like to share with you in the end. The first quote is for everyone always to remember, even people without disabilities. It's something you can keep close to your mind, and that's you may encounter many defeats, but you must not be defeated. Please remember that your difficulties do not define. They simply strengthen your ability to survive. And that quote is from Maya Angelou. The next quote in conjunction with that is a very strong one. It's true courage is being afraid and going ahead and doing your job anyhow. That is what courage is, and that's from our Commander-in-Chief, Norman Schwarzkopf. And another great inspiration thing that I found in my graduate class at the University of Organizational Behavior was the meaning of hope. The meaning of hope equals mental willpower and way power to achieve your goals. Always keep that strong thought in your head, and you can overcome the goals even if you have difficulty with your abilities or disabilities to be able to transaction though. And the one simple quote that I came up with after that is I shared with many people that I've worked with on campus, on East Campus at the Barclays Center. I do different reading programs and different techniques with them that they work with people with disabilities. And actually, Gina was the first one that I worked with at the university. And then another person came into that department and I started working with them. And every day I would write new quotes when I would come in on Tuesday to have my meeting with them and do my transactions. The last one that I came up with, it's very simple, but it's something to always remember. The day starts with the sun. The evening begins with the moon. Your life begins with hope and glory. Nothing will ever get its way, not even a disability. Always keep a great spirit with your life, and hope and glory will be there forever. That was a good guy. Hate to end it with a quote, but.
If you'd make it through, and you did.
It was, I would have
Hope
to say,
and
to my graduate class, it was a little simpler because I was in students that I already knew, and I didn't get choked up. And not that I'm embarrassed for getting choked up, but at times these can be hard things to discuss, and I'm so glad I was able to share it with you guys. But sometimes it is difficult for people that have suffered from traumatic injuries to talk to strangers, groups of strangers, and be able to keep a free flow without maybe getting choked up or hard to talk about different areas of your disabilities. But
And I think Micah also illustrates how encompassing the brain injury is, because it does affect every aspect of your life, and that's why it's hard too.
Brandon?
One of the really neat things about the Brain Injury Association and getting to meet other TBI survivors like Micah and Gina is anytime that you start to feel sorry for yourself and your situation, you meet other people and you're inspired by them and realize what other people are going through and the struggles they go through. And just Micah delivering that speech, I'm thinking here the whole time, hoping that my now 7-year-old Alexis is able to sit up here one day and be able to do what Micah just did, which was incredible. So you did an amazing job, Micah. I'm Brandon Verzal. My daughter Alexis was a victim of shaken baby syndrome. To give a little background, we lived in Texas at the time. My wife and I, as was stated earlier, were video producers. We worked for Texas A&M Athletics doing their videos. And Alexis was at an in-home daycare. It was a woman who took care of kids for 25 years, took care of the kids of head football coaches, head basketball coaches, pretty much just athletic department employees is who sent their kids there. You know, amazing references. We did all the checks that normal parents do for where you're going to take your child. And it was April 3rd, 2008. We had dropped her off. We had only been at work for about 45 minutes, and we got a phone call just saying that she was being rushed to the hospital. And so we had just seen her literally an hour before. That morning she was running around. It was one of the first times that she had actually run. We were chasing her around the house and thinking, oh my goodness, we're never going to be able to keep up with her now. And so obviously there was nothing wrong with her when we dropped her off. And so at the time, the only thing I could think of is that something happened, but it can't be that serious. How could you only be away from a child for an hour and it be something dramatic? You know, they said she didn't fall, she didn't choke on anything, you know, the immediate things you think of that she'd have to get to rush to the hospital for. As far as we knew, they didn't happen. So we rushed to the emergency room. We actually got there before Alexis got there in the ambulance. And Tiffany went in to get everything checked in, and I waited for where the ambulance was going to pull up, and they were pulling her off of the ambulance, and I yelled her name a couple times, and she moved her arms and legs. And being a sports guy and working in athletics, I'm like, oh, that's good. It's just like when the football player's down on the field, if he moves his arms and legs, everything's going to be okay. They're just being really careful. So at the time, I was encouraged by that. Of course, later on, I found out that it was seizures. That's the reason why she was moving her arms and legs, which I had no idea of. So after a couple hours in the emergency room in College Station, Texas, where Texas A&M is at, we were told that she had a bleed on her brain, which didn't make any sense to us. We didn't know what that meant. We thought, did she fall sometime a couple weeks ago and it just developed all of a sudden? We just had no idea. And the daycare provider, this was within 3 hours of the incident happened, we'd already been informed that she'd hired a lawyer and shut down her daycare. And but still at the time, we didn't think it was suspicious. Her husband was a police officer, so we thought he was probably just being careful and knew what the situation was. And in fact, in a lot of our early interviews with the police, we were saying there's no way that it was anything she did. She would never hurt her child. We just moved last week, as a matter of fact, and we came across our Christmas letter from 4 months before Alexis was hurt. And I didn't even remember that we had done this, but we even had a paragraph in our Christmas letter about how great our daycare provider was, named her by name, how much Alexis loved her, and we felt so good about dropping her off every day. So as things developed, Alexis then got life-flighted to a better hospital in Temple, Texas. And we didn't get to see her then again until about 4 hours later, after we had to get interviewed by police and go through all of that procedure. We drove to Temple, Texas, and the next time we saw her, we walked into the emergency room, and she's got tubes all over her body, and she's in a coma. And still at that point, I still didn't think it could be serious. I had seen her healthy that morning. I still thought they're just being careful. It's going to be like the movie. She's in a coma, but she's going to open her eyes in a couple days, and we'll get through this, and everything's going to be fine. As we started to talk to the doctors, and we'd been in ICU for 6 and 7 days, and watched her brain swell and then go down and then swell and go down, we started to have the doctors kind of say things to us like, there's kids like this that end up okay. And, your 14-month-old daughter, and you're hearing there's a chance she might be okay. And that's when it started to occur to us that this was something that was serious, and it wasn't something that she was going to open her eyes and be okay with. She was in ICU for about 8 days, and then we were in the next step down for another 10 days or so. And we were trying to figure out what to do with her next. She was like a newborn baby. She's 15 months old now, and at this point, couldn't move her arms and legs, couldn't talk, just couldn't do anything. She just laid there and pretty much screamed 20 hours a day. There's a brain injury when you start to wake up. There's an agitation. A lot of adults will cuss a lot when they wake up and have that agitation. I don't know if you did that or not, Micah. But babies and young children will just scream, just this ear-piercing scream for 20 hours a day. And so we knew that we had to do something. People said, well, you can take her home, and maybe when the drugs wear off, everything will be okay. But we knew that that wasn't the answer. There's no way that in the condition she was in, we were just going to be okay taking her home and things were going to work themselves out. We were fortunate enough that the only hospital in the entire country, and we were in Temple, Texas, so we were within 90, I guess I should say, we were within a 3-hour drive of San Antonio, Houston, Dallas, Austin, just huge cities. I think there was 19 million people, they say, within a 3-hour radius of where we were at, and no hospitals would take Alexis. She was too young. She was too hurt. There was nothing they could do with her. You can't do anything with a baby that young. You got to wait until they get older and see what's wrong with them. So we were at a loss. We didn't know what we were going to do. And then finally a caseworker came in and said, have you guys ever heard of Madonna Rehabilitation Hospital in Lincoln? And we said, my wife and I both grew up in Nebraska. And we said, oh my gosh, we can go there. We'll be close to our family. That's great. And Madonna literally was the only place that would take Alexis at the time. So 25 days later, on April 28th, we flew back to Lincoln. Alexa started therapy there, and it was the same thing. This was 25 days later. She was blind, couldn't move her arms and legs, couldn't talk, couldn't walk, really just could not do anything at all. So we started the intense daily rehabilitation in inpatient at Madonna, and they were just trying to do anything to get her to move her legs, to move her arms. They were really working on her eyesight early on. They would use they're light wands, essentially. You see them in the checkout at Walgreens that spin and do lights. And every day they would run that wand back and forth in front of her eyes, and we did it day after day for weeks and weeks on end. And I remember telling my wife, Tiffany, at the time, I'm like, it's not doing anything. Why are we doing this every single day? And Holly Shifsky, who was our occupational therapist at the time, one day, I think it was about 3.5 weeks later, her eye just moved a millimeter real quick when the wand happened. And then every day it just got better and better and better. And now on her good days, there's a whole nother story to this, which we may get into later on, but on her good days, she'll see at about 90%. And so we're talking about the difference at that time frame of us taking her home, and she would have been blind for the rest of her life if we wouldn't have attacked that at that time and started to work on that problem. She would have never seen. Her eyes were rolled back in her head. They never would have moved. But because we were in the right place, had the right therapist that knew the right treatment to do, she can now see, and which is just miraculous. Literally, the part of her brain, the occipital lobe that processes her vision, doesn't exist, and her brain figured out a way to make it work. So that's one of the big things about brain injury, is just how important it is right away to get treatment. The longer you wait, even for mild TBIs, just the more time or the more problems long-term that person's going to have. So Alexis, we spent about 2 months in inpatient, and once again we had to decide if we were going to move back to College Station, Texas, which is a town smaller than Lincoln that didn't really have the people we needed to get her better. And so we made a decision. We literally spent a weekend, went and packed up our house, which we hadn't been in since that morning when we dropped her off at daycare, packed up our house, and we moved to Lincoln, and we've been here ever since. And Alexis still goes to therapy 3 or 4 days a week. She's 7 years old now. She's in a normal second grade class. Like I said, her eyesight, obviously just visual-wise, she can see. She can walk on her own. She uses a walker sometimes. Sometimes she uses a wheelchair. Long distances are a challenge for her. She still has a lot of paralysis on her right side. She doesn't have a lot of use of her right arm. Still a lot of cognitive issues. Learning's becoming a problem. Reading, things like that are really challenging just because she kind of has different areas of her brain that have damage, and so it's hard for her to process those things. But from 14 months old and being told that she was going to have a feeding tube, and probably that at some point she's going to be too much for us, and we're going to have her in a nursing home for the rest of her life. And now we're hopeful that one day she'll live independently like Micah and Gina are able to, and that's really what we're working towards right now. But just the support system, the Nebraska Brain Injury Association and Madonna and the healthcare community, the Department of Health and Human Services, the support system here in Lincoln has been unbelievable. I mean, we don't have one complaint in those areas. We have amazing specialists that have worked with Alexis, and 7 years later, she's still recovering. She still makes progress week to week, month to month, year to year. A lot of people, we heard in the very early stages that traumatic brain injury, you had about a year to recover, and then after that year, you're kind of capped, and you're going to kind of be in that state for the rest of your life. And it is so far the opposite of that. We've been very lucky just because of insurance and other reasons that she's still getting a lot of therapy every single week, and she's still making progress because of that. And that's another thing I really want to emphasize, is just how important it is for these people with brain injuries to have access to that health care, to have access to rehabilitation, to have access to all the resources that they need, and to have that for a long time. They can't have it for 3 months or 4 months or 5 months. The only way they can be independent, and there's numbers you can quote in terms of the long-term cost of sending someone home early and then having to bring them back in the hospital, or them having problems 10 or 15 years later, or having to be in the state's care 10 years later, versus taking care of them in those first 5 or 6 years after they're hurt. I mean, it literally is the difference between somebody telling their story like Micah right now, or sitting in a nursing home and not able to do anything, and having a really, really difficult life. So if nothing else, from my part of today, is just understanding how important that care and that support system is in a community for people with brain injuries.
And thank you and I think you did hit home. We have, I mean, here in Lincoln, and I think even in Omaha, there are some great services and resources. And as Gina can attest to, and I know in my years at Madonna, as we move out west, it certainly gets a lot harder. Central Nebraska and western Nebraska is a lot harder to find good rehab services. So that, again, one of our focuses as a Brain Injury Association, excuse me, is to help educate folks about those needs so that we can hopefully improve services. Gina, if you want to talk just a little bit about some of the calls that you get, just to.
You bet. I guess the first thing I kind of like to start out with was my own experience a little bit, because I had great rehabilitation at Madonna. I just, went through therapies, and everyone is just like, oh, she's doing so well. Even though, again, you learn the basics first, and you gradually build up to becoming an outpatient. However, no matter how well a person does with a brain injury after they go through rehabilitation, once you're discharged, you still, most people with brain injuries, I can't say all, but most people with brain injuries, they have total lack of awareness as far as what's changed, what's happened to them. And it could be anywhere from subtle abnormalities to very big abnormalities. Again, you're talking about the physical stuff, the emotional stuff, the cognitive things, the social aspects. Once I got out of Madonna, again, I was just like, I thought I was going to hit the ground running and get back to work and do everything just fine. Well, no, that doesn't happen that way. To me, that's the beginning of recovery. Once you get through rehab, you learn some good, useful tools and strategies, as well as the support systems. But again, you're at the very beginning of healing, and it takes, to me, a brain injury. You're never, you hear a lot of people in professionals say, "Oh, this person's going to be 100% recovered." There is no 100% recovery ever. And again, when we say brain injury, we're talking about strokes, meningitis, encephalitis, shaken baby, the traumatic brain injuries. The traumatic brain injuries, just to differentiate, because I don't know how much everybody here knows, but, there's acquired brain injury, that's at the top of the list. And acquired brain injury is separated into traumatic brain injury, which is when you get a blow or an insult to the head. And then you divide that into the meningitis, encephalitis, anoxia from after a stroke or something, or a near drowning accident. There's all kinds of different brain injuries, and of course they're all different strokes, but yet we all share the similar symptoms. So when I get phone calls from people, I would say most of my phone calls aren't when they're still in rehab, but most of them have never been through rehab. Most people, I got this registry letter, which I'm so glad that the state of Nebraska started in 2008, and I'm not sure why I received it. And then I started asking them questions, well, have you ever had a fall? Have you been in a car wreck? Oh, yeah, but, I just got whiplash. We went through the emergency room. They put me through a CAT scan. Nothing was found. I'm just fine. Well, then we start going through the symptoms. Well, have you ever experienced, and again, I send out to everyone a 4-page symptom checklist with brain injuries, and they can identify quite a few. The stickler with most of these people, even though they're post for several years, is, will insurance cover them to be evaluated? Will their primary care physician be able to send them to somewhere to be evaluated? Is the evaluator decent? Do they understand brain injury? So you have to go through all these different obstacles with these people to make sure they get the proper help and services. And especially like Peggy had brought up in western Nebraska, well, anywhere outside Lincoln and Omaha. But there again, you wonder, well, is Lincoln and Omaha pretty well covered? No, we're not. There's still a lot of people being missed and going to professionals who don't understand brain injury. So again, that's where the Brain Injury Association, all of us together, we really need to be able to educate as many people, lay people, professionals as we can. And of course, we're also trying to get up a brain injury community center to be able to do that sometime in the near future after we get the Brain Injury Association of Nebraska up and going strong. So we've got a lot ahead of us. But like one of the stories I'll share with you is an individual who's 21 years old. He incurred a brain, well, what we believe, again, I can't say he's got a brain injury because I don't diagnose it, but he was in a severe car wreck. He was with his buddy, they were both drunk. He went through the windshield, got home, thought he was okay. Never went to the emergency room. I would say a few weeks later, he started developing some of the symptoms. Again, the brain was probably swelling by that time. And he starts, experiencing a lot more physical symptoms, the cognitive, the planning, organizational stuff just isn't effective. But he's not aware as far as what's going on and what's not going on. He doesn't know what's changed, but something's different. Then this individual, he tries to continue on, not getting any help. His parents are divorced, and his mom has suffered a brain injury before. Again, hasn't ever been diagnosed. So his parents divorce. So now he's living with his father. His father is getting quite angry with him because, now we're going to go jump ahead to 2 years later where hadn't been in another car accident, which is, typically pretty common for someone with a brain injury. They become a little bit more impulsive and they're more apt to have a second brain injury. Well, he was in another car accident with the same kid that he was in the first accident with. Again, went through the windshield. Now he's really not functioning well. Again, he could have died from what we called second impact syndrome. But working with this individual, he shows a lot of the symptoms, whether they be cognitive, physical, social. The strategy or the difficulty or challenges that I'm being faced with is how can we get services to this kid when, number one, he's not aware of what's changed. He knows his whole life is different. His father isn't handling this well. His mother doesn't want to help him because she's suffered her own potential brain injury. He's lost a lot of his friends because they're young and they want to move on with life and they don't understand brain injury. He's dropped out of school. He can't get a job, but yet he's thinking of all these, high idealizations of what he could do or what he wanted to do before the brain injuries. And there again, we're talking about Western Nebraska where there are professionals who treat with brain injury, but again, they don't know enough about it. So every person I try to send him to, they're just, making him go back home. Again, he's got high anxiety, high depression, and it's hard to get services. We finally were able to get this individual set up with the brain injury support group within his area. And of course, there's a speech language pathologist, which is wonderful help, an occupational therapist. But given him with his lack of awareness, we also hooked him up the Region 1 services to be able to move away from his father who's being abusive to him and set him up with more of an independent living place. That ended up following through because he wasn't able to follow through on any suggestions I provided. And once we got people to see him and communicate with them, there again, he didn't follow through with anything. So you have to wonder, what's going to happen with some of these individuals. And this is one of my toughest cases. And do I have this occur frequently? Yes, I do. It's more and more so, and we're coming upon more legal situations, more behavioral situations where people have a lot of impulses, where they don't think and they just go ahead and do something real quickly. So a lot of behavioral changes, and they're dangerous to themselves as well as others. And again, where do we put these people? Because sometimes they're forced into nursing homes, which isn't a good place for them. Some of the people end up in the prison systems. That's not a good place for them. Because again, the professionals there don't understand brain injury and how to deal with them. It's not a rehabilitative environment at all. So, and to me, these are the difficult issues that we're facing more and more, and this scares me. but we're doing the best we can. So,
Peggy and Gina, I don't know if you guys know what the numbers were. I know they did a study at one point where they did scans of prisoners in one certain area, and the numbers were just astonishing, the numbers that had suffered a brain injury at some point in their life. I don't remember what the percentage was. I just remember almost falling over when I heard what it was. I mean, it was just...
I think it depends upon what report you look at. And I know there's so much more talk nowadays about prison reform. And as an association, I'm like, oh, that's probably one more cause we should jump onto. But, you know, I think at one time I had seen somewhere 30 to 50% easily. So
yeah, that's what Jesse Brown is saying, that there was one that was up to 80% was one study. So just astonishing numbers, and a testament to what Gina's talking about, of that intervention and trying to help early on, because long term, even injuries that people personally don't think they suffered or had any problem with and don't recognize can turn into just obviously major issues long term.
And we do get, as an association, we do get letters, because the prisoners can't call for information, so they write us letters. And so we keep them and we try to respond and help give them, you know, advice, suggestions, but it's definitely out there. Micah, I know you've been writing a whole bunch of notes. You have something to say, I'm pretty sure.
Actually, it's notes from what both Brandon and Gina had talked about. Just simple things with, as Gina said, was rebuilding the TBI, and the different awareness of what's going on is simple facts that you remember one day, but the next day you do the same thing and you're like, oh, I forgot. I wasn't supposed to go that way, or I needed to do the project this way. And you relearn it again the new day, and every day it can repeat itself. But there are times too when others, you get afraid of what others are going to think. Like they're never going to think I'm going to get back to the way I was before the accident. But sometimes they're too giving, where they don't let you do certain projects because they don't think you can handle it. But that gets you kind of stressed because you want to be as normal as you can, and it's hard to rebuild.
Gina talking about the father of the story she was talking about. I mean, it's like Alexis in our case. There was a time probably 6 months ago where Alexis asked me, she said, I wonder how Josh is doing. And I said, well, who's Josh? And she goes, Josh from Laszlo's. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. She thinks of Josh from Laszlo's. And a little behind in putting my old receipts in Quicken, and I'm going through it about a week later. And, of course, our server at Laszlo's about 4 weeks before was named Josh. So Alexis will remember something like that. 4 weeks before, we'll remember the name of the server at Laszlo's, which we eat out way too much, so we see a lot of servers. So she will remember that, yet we will eat dinner, and 20 minutes later she'll ask if we've eaten dinner yet. And so that's the thing with with Gina's example of the father being frustrated. There's things like that where you're like, she has an amazing memory. How does she not know if she ate dinner 20 minutes ago? And people that don't understand brain injury and don't understand the way it works, I can see how it would just be incredibly frustrating, and it would just be almost impossible to understand. And so just the community awareness side of recognizing things like that Alexis can test one day equal with her peers in second grade, and the next day will test below a kindergarten level. That's the way it changes from day to day, and there's not just a common line or a commonality in how she does things, and that's the way it is with brain injuries. It is different from person to person, and there is absolutely no commonality from day to day in terms of how a person is.
And with exactly what Brandon was saying too, some of the other opportunities that are available for people that have suffered from a TBI, sometimes the person themselves wants everyone to see them as a normal and not want to take the extra things that are out there. A great example for me is at the university in my test taking times. I never wanted the test extension times that I had. I could take a test for 3 hours or go into class and take it for 1 hour. Great example is for my first graduate class, I actually went into class and I didn't want the test extension time to see what I could do. And the professor that worked with me was such a great person. He knew that my abilities and stuff. And the first test I took, when I finished it, I think it was at about a 79%. And he actually called me in his office and said, I'm going to give you another chance, and you're going to take the 3 hours that you're able to take the test. And reluctantly, I didn't want to, but with the professor offering me the opportunity, I thought I better jump on it. And I did retake the test. Ended up scoring a 96.3 on the test. So ended up getting an A.
But I'm sure it is hard to ask for that extra help because you want to not, you remember life before and you didn't need that extra help. And so it's humbling to ask for the assistance.
It is, but even like what Micah was saying, asking for assistance is a bit difficult because, number one, you don't understand for a number of years why you're different again, what's changed, until you build that awareness and you look into the brain injury symptoms that you experience. Oftentimes, I mean, to me, a person has to become their own biggest advocate, and that's very difficult. Because like I said, it can take years, and then you can finally start to explain yourself to people why you do the things the way you do. I know for Micah, and I'm sure for Alexis also, and for myself, when I was taking tests, the ticking of a clock was the worst. I got as much time as I needed to finish the test, and I got my own individual room, but yet that tick, tick, tick of that clock, I was just like, you about to go crazy. Because there again, the changes in the brain affects the auditory as well as the visual stuff. And the auditory, everything, I mean, I lost a lot of hearing. It sounds like an oxymoron, but yet I gained sensitivity to the really small sounds. So the ticking of the clock just totally distracted me, and I could not finish a lot of those tests until someone had to personally come and get that clock out. And there again, just a little thing like that, a little change, you know, and that's something that I like to bring to people's attention when they have a young child with a brain injury in school systems. And we have a wonderful BURST system, or brain injury regional school support teams here in Nebraska, where we have specialized people across the state who, if we have a child with a brain injury, we can get them involved and make sure that that student gets the proper services. I know we're still kind of waxing and waning because the professionals can't be everywhere at all times, but yet we're doing so much better than most states, and we're happy to have that.
And I know we're going to wrap up here, but I mean, just one of the things we did is we got legislation passed this last year. I think we are one of 3 states now that have a concussion awareness law in place for schools, that they have to have a protocol in place to help those kids returning with any sort of brain injury. But we got it kicked in because of the concussion awareness, so that was good. I think with that, I think we're going to take some questions. Did any of you guys have any last minute thoughts? No? Okay.
Questions? Okay. Would you stand up?
Where do you get the checklist for the TBI or whatever?
Well, I kind of invented my own, but I had professionals look at it because, you know, you get, it was real difficult for me to ask, you know, all these different questions of the brain injury people, but I will feel free to, if you want one, if anybody wants one, I will disseminate that to anybody who wants one.
I mean, if I can get hold of you somehow.
Oh, easily. Yes, I've got cards here, so
okay.
You bet. You bet.
I have a question for Brandon. I'm interested to know how your daughter's language and communication was affected from her injury, and also just with going to school and socially with her peers.
Yeah, she was diagnosed with apraxia of speech. So we spent a long time, especially in the inpatient in the early days when we were still going almost full time to rehab. We spent a lot of time on speech. We would ask her to say a word and her mouth would open, but nothing would come out. And she would see something and her mouth would open, and sometimes the mouth would even form the letter that was supposed to come out, but it just wouldn't come out. With intensive speech therapy now, she talks really, really well. She can communicate what she needs. We understand her really well. Sometimes she needs a little translation with other kids, and that does affect socially. Play dates and stuff like that, we feel like we almost have to be there, not only for the physical side, but to kind of translate and maintain that communication. But overall, it took, let's see, she got hurt April 3rd, and I would say the first time she started to actually form even sounds that sounded like letters was probably October, maybe. So it took a long time even for those sounds to come out. And she continues. She's just actually, she was released from speech therapy about a year ago, and Jesse has sent her back to speech therapy for other reasons. It's not Jesse's fault. But she's going to go back to work on some other things. But most importantly, she can communicate her needs, and for the most part, people can understand what she's saying.
Questions?
Thanks for sharing your stories, first of all. I guess I'm curious about Alexis. Were you able to figure out what happened to her, and was the daycare provider held accountable?
Yeah, several different levels. One is the daycare provider was charged. It took about 2 months later before she was charged with willful intent to cause bodily harm to a child. And what we ended up finding out through the trial and the investigation and everything is there were a lot of factors going on in the daycare provider's life that we had no idea about. She had, about 3 months before she had found out that her husband was cheating on her, had found a ring in a car that was for another woman. 3 days before she shook Alexis, she was getting a prescription refilled, and she circled that she had suicidal thoughts. So someone who's taking care of 6 or 7 kids had told someone that she was suicidal, and then she's going home and taking care of children. Just things that we had no idea about. And then we also found out while we were in the hospital with Alexis, a mom came in just bawling as soon as she walked in the room and said that she had pulled her child out of Renee's daycare, Renee Munyon is her name, a month before because she had gotten abused. Her daughter had got hit so hard that she had a welt on her back. And this mom was a guidance counselor at a high school, so knew that she should report that to protective services. It never got reported. In fact, she then took her daughter to another daycare that was full and said, you have to let her in, she's being abused at her other daycare. And that daycare center didn't call protective services as well. So 3 weeks before, that daycare should have been shut down, but a phone call wasn't made, and so it stayed open. The trial was almost a year and a half later, and was probably worse than the intensive care moments. It was almost 4 weeks long. It was a small town in Texas where everybody, were the people that moved back to Nebraska, and they're the Texas people, so all the stuff that I just talked about came out during the trial. The judge, when it was a jury trial, when they sent it to the jury, the judge called the district attorney and said, "Are we doing sentencing tonight?" He's like, "If this was my case, I'd walk out, take a sip of water, walk back in, and give her 25 years in prison." But it was a jury trial, and from what I've heard from talking to jurors afterwards, they knew that she did it, but they got really caught up on, did she know when she did it that it would cause permanent bodily harm, which is kind of irrelevant. But so it went from an 11-1 guilty verdict, and 3 days later, after deliberating for 3 days, it completely flipped, and they found her not guilty, which is actually really, really common in those cases. Shaken baby cases in particular are very divided in terms of male-female conviction rates, very divided in terms of racial makeup, in terms of whether they're found guilty or not. It's a real big problem, because what you have as an adult, you have children that can't testify as to what happened, you have a victim that can't testify as to what happened, so it ends up being medical evidence of what happened. There's 2 or 3 doctors in the United States that their full-time job is flying to these trials and saying that shaken baby syndrome is a myth and isn't real, and so they get paid a lot of money to come in and give an opposing point of view. So it's easy to get that reasonable doubt in the trial situation. So that's the whole story, and it happens a lot. Unfortunately, that same thing happens a lot.
Brendan, do you want to just touch on Forever Shaken a little bit more and what that's about?
Sure. The documentary that Peggy's talking about, we always heard about what happens with shaken baby syndrome, that it can cause deaths, that it can cause long-term bodily harm, that it can happen to kids, and then in 7th grade they have a learning disability and you have no idea what it is. Well, it might have been that they were shaken when they were little by a parent or a daycare provider or somewhere else. So what we wanted to do is we took 4 stories of people in Nebraska that are kids that were shaken when they were 0 to 14 months. I think Alexis was the oldest one, and showed how they live their life and what they have to deal with day to day now. And it's everything from Antonio, whose father shook him in Omaha, who is almost 3 years old now, and just beautiful, beautiful boy, beautiful family that has adopted him. But he literally can't move. He lays down all day or is in a wheelchair all day. There's Alexis, who's made great progress. There's Chase, who's from Norfolk, who was in the hospital with us at the same time as Alexis, who has some of the same struggles that Alexis has. There's a 12-year-old Ethan who's out in Grand Island, so he's dealt with it for 11 years. And it's just talking about the day-to-day struggles of these kids are just enormous. I mean, things like, in Alexis's case, when she sleeps at night, she doesn't have the dexterity to pull the covers over herself. She can't roll over. If she gets her arm stuck under her, she can't readjust. So think about laying down at night and just having to stay in whatever position you're in for the whole night because you can't do anything. And just think about how uncomfortable that would be. And that's what these kids deal with. That's a small microcosm of what these kids deal with on a day-to-day basis. So this documentary looks at those kids and what they deal with, what support they need, and kind of a behind the scenes of knowing when you hear what shaken baby and abusive head trauma does, what that really means for a child for the rest of their life and what they have to live with. So.
And I think we really wanted to do that to highlight. So many times we hear it highlighted in the news, what happened to the perpetrator, the one who was accused or being looked at as being the one who shook, and there's never the end story about what happens to the kids. And so that's what we really wanted to capture, was what happens to the kids, and hopefully that will help be a preventative message. So we'll have those videos available, some out here. If you want more, let me know.
More questions?
Hi, I'm Cindy with the Brain Injury Association. So this is not so much a question as a statement. Peggy touched on this a little bit. You have to watch that because I talk with my hands. About this retreat that we hold for women who are caregivers of soldiers. Since 9/11, the most significant injury to soldiers going to Iraq and Afghanistan is a traumatic brain injury, from explosions, from Humvees turning over, just all sorts of ways that they are concussed and they hit their heads over there. And so there's a tremendous amount of soldiers returning that have brain injuries, and I don't think that's a real well-known fact either. In a lot of cases, we held one of these retreats last year for these women, and like in Nebraska, 89% of the soldiers are men, so the predominant number of caregivers are women. But they are very young, sometimes got married right out of high school, and so these women are very young, sometimes have young children, and then a man comes back and this was kind of touched on a little bit, but a lot of times a traumatic brain injury completely changes your personality. You're a completely different person. You deal with things differently. You don't track the same as you did. I mean, you're just a different person. So this stranger comes into their household, and it's very hard for these women to learn to accommodate. Sometimes these women come to this retreat and don't even know that the person they're living with has had post-traumatic stress or brain injury, and so it's a real eye-opening experience. And so it's something we started a year ago that's just very, very important for a large number of people in Nebraska. That again, once a soldier comes home and you see the ticker tape parade and everybody's hugging, that's it. That's all we remember is, oh, they're home and everything's great. But we don't think about these people then going home with brain injuries that are diagnosed or sometimes undiagnosed, and what these young women are trying to deal with, and they don't know what's going on either. So again, she said that we're having another retreat in Omaha the 1st of October. And so just so you're aware that that's out there too, in case you know of a woman who's taking care of a soldier that's returned and is having problems. But a lot of times you may not know they're having problems because of the military aspect. They don't want the word to get out that this guy's having problems, you know. And so they keep really close tabs. But I think you would know if someone's under stress and not dealing well. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that point in.
And the flyers are out in the back or on the front desk. So
this is just kind of in addendum to what Micah had to say. I have the privilege of being his aunt by marriage, and you know what? Our oldest son was killed in a car accident, and he had blunt force trauma, and he had traumatic brain injury. And I think as parents, we go home and we tend to put our other children in a bubble because, heaven forbid, something like that would happen to another child. And if it didn't teach me anything else, it taught me that, like Micah said, treat us how to treat them. And I treat Micah like I do all of my other nieces and nephews. I talk to him. I would never dream of talking down to him like he is disabled or has a disability, because I truly, in my heart of hearts, don't think that he does. He, you know, I really feel like Micah is an outstanding, just an outstanding person, and has brought a lot of joy to our family. So I think it's real important for other people to treat them just like they would anybody else, and then I think deal with however the outcome is afterwards, and see where it takes you. As parents, I know we like to try to maybe put them in a bubble and tend to baby and hover, but Micah is a grown man and an adult and is married and hopefully going to make me a great aunt someday. And so, I mean, I think it's just real important that people know that, you know, they do lead normal lives. So.
Maybe I don't want to ask a question. I got a brain injury almost 2 years ago, and I was wondering how, if I hadn't come to this, how I would have kind of been able to find resources, because once you leave, they don't really tell you a whole lot, and you kind of have to be your own expert at it, and you have to figure it out for yourself. And if nobody kind of directs you into the way to find those resources, I guess how should we be finding them out? And can I have that list of 20 pages that you, because I think that'd be really helpful for me personally.
Yeah. I would say that the starting point is just starting to find out information from others. And of course the Brain Injury Association of Nebraska webpage, the website, that's a wonderful resource. Madonna Rehab Hospital, Quality Living.
I was at Madonna for a year.
Super. Always, you know, I think a lot of people tend to think that once they're done with rehab, you can't contact these people ever again. You know, they're still important resources for me today, for myself as well as for all the people we all serve. And you can always go back to them, always, with questions, with concerns, suggestions.
I think what you bring up a really good point. I mean, as an association, we've been around since 2009. We're pretty young in the world of advocacy groups. And with a staff of 2, we contracted Gina to do the wonderful work she does. But it is really hard to get information out to all the folks that need it and to help answer those questions. And so I know as an association, we're trying to introduce some legislation to help hire or fund. Nebraska doesn't fund any brain injury services. The funding that we get for Gina is federally funded, and it's a grant that's going to go away. And so we know that we have to be out there to advocate and help folks understand that there are folks that need those resources. So we continue to work on that, but we know we got a long ways to go. So.
And we're glad you're here.
Yeah. Glad you found your way.
Yes, my husband had a tractor run over him about 15 years ago and has had a brain injury. And just like you have talked a lot about the denial aspect, he'd still be in denial about it if we weren't going to a support group. So I wonder if you might talk about some of the support groups we do have throughout the state and what a great resource they can be to an individual, too.
Thank you, Teresa, for pointing that out. We do have 13 support groups across the state. Gina runs one of them here, Teresa, who helps run the other one, and Nina also. So we've got a couple, and we've also got a support group that meets at Madonna. They meet with younger children. But our website, if you're not from Lincoln, we've got all of the support groups listed on our website under supports. Or just let us know, and we'd be happy to help answer some of those or tell you who to contact. So.
And no question is a stupid question, so ask what you need to anytime. We're always here for you.
And one other quick thing about the support groups, all of them are pretty much self-run, so we as an association, Cindy and I don't put a lot of work into it. It's just really good people like Teresa and Nita and Gina that really keep them flowing, so we're thankful for them.
For like people here, you're all learning about traumatic brain injury, but when you go out into the community, what kind of advice can you give people to be able to spread the awareness and to like help people understand, you know, exactly what traumatic brain injury is and how people are dealing with it, I guess? Like, how do you spread that awareness?
I stand at my mailbox and just talk to every neighbor. Every neighbor knows what I do. I think, I don't know about the rest of you guys, but I can speak for myself. I mean, any opportunity you get to talk about it, you share the information. And what's always amazing to me is that whoever you talk to, somebody knows somebody with a brain injury. It never ceases to amaze me. So not being shy about talking about it. And I know sometimes it's hard. Micah, you can maybe speak on that a little bit.
It's being able to talk to people you do not know. You never want to tell them about your disability, but if you're having trouble with some process, you might say, I might need to be retaught that, or I don't understand how that works. And, you know, they said, well, I just taught you. And then if you feel like you want to talk with them and they're nice to talk to, you can go ahead and tell them about your experience or the issues that you have. And with what you were saying, the great thing I was showing Peggy when she was talking too is to always remember my last quote. Even if you have the disability and you're talking to somebody that doesn't, and you know they ask you a question that troubles you, you just always can say, well, a simple way to put it without getting in medical terms and to know about the person is, you know, the day starts with the sun, the evening begins with the moon. Nothing can get in its way if your life always begins with hope and glory. Disability will not affect that. Everybody's the same, but some people have disabilities that are hard to overcome.
Is there a certain technique or form of counseling for anger management? Or
I would say there are several. I mean, number one, with any person with a TBI, you have to go to a specialist, whether it be a licensed mental health professional here in Nebraska, a social worker who does the counseling, a neuropsychologist or a psychologist. They have to understand the brain injury. And there are certain individuals within Nebraska, and I can give you that resource packet also. I can point out, I know Tracy Kalnitz. She is an expert with the behavioral aspect of brain injury. And you know, I would always recommend those kind of people. And there again, every person is different, every situation is different, so nothing's going to cover everybody. So you just have to, you know, talk with a professional about what behaviors are happening, what the individual's like, and go at it from there.
One thing, playing off of what Gina said, is especially in healthcare, finding people with experience with brain injury is so important. There's there's appointments we've gone to, and we've gone to hundreds of them over the last 6 years, that within 5 minutes of meeting with a doctor, whoever it is, we know they don't understand brain injury, and we're like, okay, this is a waste of time, and we're never going to come back here again. No, we don't say that and walk out. We go through the process and everything. But and I know your son has a brain injury, and you're going to run into that a lot, where you'll just know right away, this person's not going to help us, and that's just the way it is. But experience in brain injuries is just the key thing, and the more experience you can find, and the specialists in that area are just so important.
And I think you kind of figure those out by going to the support groups or talking to others within the community that you know have a brain injury. I think you guys learn a lot from each other, because as a professional, I still don't walk that walk. I don't walk the daily struggles, but it's like Gina can help you, and you end up reaching out to a lot of different folks.
Peggy, would you share your website address as a way for the whole group to kind of get a jumping off point for services?
Right. Yep. Our website. Well, if you simply just hit Google Brain Injury Nebraska, you're going to find us. But it's www.BIA-NE, so braininjurynebraska.org. So.
And it's on some of the materials that are available at the front desks.
Right. Yep.
Well, we made it. Micah, we made it. You want to introduce us to your wife?
Yes. Summer, if you would like to stand. This is my wife, Summer.
Well, I don't know about you, but I was incredibly inspired today. And please join me in thanking all of these folks for being here. It takes a lot of courage to tell stories, to tell my story, and that's what they did for you. So I hope you walk away here knowing that it was truly a bit of courage and bravery for them to do it, to tell their stories, and we're grateful for that. I will also remind you that our next event is September 25th. I graduated from drug court. The Honorable Karen Flowers, one of the founders of the drug court, will be here to talk about that, as well as a few of the drug court graduates, and I'm sure they will have a compelling story to tell you. And then on October 16th, we'll be hearing from survivors of cancer. So again, thank you. There are materials out in the front I know that Peggy has told you about, and we are glad you're here today, and thank you for being here, and have a great day. Thank you.